This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Click the link in the video description to learn more. Asus is a pretty massive computer company. They make pretty much everything related to computers, like mice and keyboards and peripherals and motherboards. But over the last couple of years, they've probably been best known for their ROG gaming brand. And a couple of years ago, gaming phones started blowing up in the landscape. We saw stuff like the Razer phone, the Red Nubia Magic, and Asus thought, we gotta get in on this. But it's Asus, and they didn't want to be beat. So they went to Qualcomm, and they asked them if they could make an overclocked version of the flagship Snapdragon 845 processor for their brand new Asus ROG phone. Then last year, Asus refined the ROG phone and went to Qualcomm again, and Qualcomm made a new version of the processor, now called the Snapdragon 855 Plus, which was available to more consumers. Now, Asus refined the design of the ROG phone. They made it a little less gamery in your face, and they tried to appeal to a wider audience. They actually brought over a big part of the UI interface from the Zenfone 6, which had a much broader appeal. And this year, Asus is trying to do it again. They've once again refined their ROG phone to create the ROG Phone 3. So the design of the ROG Phone 3 hasn't really changed a ton from the ROG Phone 2. They tried to make it a little bit more subtle. They removed some of the orange accent colors that you saw on the vents and on the speakers of the phone. And it's still a pretty thick phone, but that's to account for the 6,000 milliamp hour battery that's in this thing. Now, just like last year, there are multiple USB-C ports on the ROG Phone 3. You've got the standard USB-C port on the bottom of the phone, which is actually shifted to the left for the weird shape of the motherboard. And you've got another USB-C port on the left side of the phone. And this is made for a number of reasons. One, if you're playing a game in landscape mode, it's a lot more comfortable to have the USB-C cable plugged into the side of the device so that it doesn't get in the way of your hands. And two, it was made to attach this brand new cooler called the AeroActive Cooler 3. Now, this is a literal fan that you strap to the back of your phone to cool it, because it does get pretty toasty in everyday use, but especially while gaming. Now, this AeroActive cooler has more uses than just cooling the phone. That is obviously very useful. It's got a headphone jack in the bottom, so you can listen to music or listen to your game while you're playing it. Unfortunately, they removed it from the body of the phone, so they put it in here instead. You've got another USB-C port, so again, you can play in landscape mode without it being uncomfortable. And this year, they've added a kickstand to it, so if you have a separate controller, you can set your phone up and it can be cooled while you're playing a game. Now, that aerodynamic vapor chamber on the side of the phone is definitely where most of the heat builds up, but there is a little vent above it to actually spew heat out of the phone. But still, the phone gets pretty toasty. So if you're gaming or doing anything intensive, it's pretty useful to use that cooler. Now, the fan is especially useful when you're using a mode called X mode. And that is basically a profile on the phone that will keep sustained performance on the phone for as long as you have the mode on. Now, normally, when you're not in this mode, the phone will kind of boost and drop the clock speeds to match what you're doing. But this will maintain a very high clock speed for a long period of time to make sure that you don't drop frames during a gaming session. Now, my colleague Gary Sims from Gary Explains made an application that basically runs his benchmark speed test G from 100% to until the phone is out of battery. And running the phone with X mode on versus X mode off really shows how it helps sustain performance over time. The AeroActive cooler definitely obviously helped, but putting the phone into X mode will keep it at a pretty consistent clock speed so that you're not like dropping frames while you're playing games. The X mode software also lets you tweak things like the clock speed of individual cores on the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 Plus, which is just an insane level of control that you're not gonna get on very many other smartphones. Now, most people probably won't care and they'll probably just use different profiles that Asus gives you. But if you're super hardcore and you wanna set that prime core to as high as you can, but set those other cores to a little bit lower clock speed, you can do that if you want. But before we get to the next section, we gotta give a shout out to our sponsor, NordVPN. Staying safe online is a bigger concern than ever before. NordVPN protects your privacy and lets you browse the internet from anywhere in the world. Having trouble streaming content that's blocked in your region? Worried about bad actors on public Wi-Fi? Check out the link in the description to get 70% off, and thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Now, speaking of frames, Asus made the ROG Phone 2 have a 120 Hz display, and last year, that was pretty unheard of. That was a brand new feature, but now, a lot of flagship phones actually have 120 Hz displays. And again, Asus didn't want to be beat, so in the ROG Phone 3, you've got a 144 Hz display. And I can't say that I can notice a huge difference between 120 Hz and 144 Hz, but either way, it's pretty insane that phones can actually support that frame rate. Now, so far, there aren't a ton of games that support full 144 Hz frame rates. Games like Dead Cells do, and Asus says that they're adding a lot more over time, but since last year, there have been a ton of games that have moved up to support 120 Hz of refresh rate. So that's pretty good anyway. Now, X mode isn't the only thing that makes this a gaming phone. Last year, Asus added these capacitive air triggers on the side of the phone, which can basically be used as buttons in games like shooters or any other kind of game that you want. This year, they've done a lot more to make those air triggers even better. So there are 2 air triggers on the side of the phone, but Asus has set different zones for them. So now you've actually got 4 different zones that you can click. They've also added swiping and sliding actions, so you can set up to 8 different functions for these buttons, and it's really intuitive how it works. I don't personally play a lot of shooters on my phone, but a friend that has the Asus ROG Phone 2 says that it is really OP. Now, you set these air triggers in a software called the Genie, which comes stock on the phone, and it's pretty well designed, honestly. You can record gameplay with it, you can add crosshairs, and you can set the action points in which you want to have the air triggers set on top of. So effectively, you just put the air triggers over UI elements in the game, and you can set different profiles so that it maintains it for every game that you jump to. It's pretty intuitive. But look, if you don't want to do that, Asus worked really hard to make sure that this is still an overall good smartphone, not just a gaming device. And that's pretty evident in the UI too. When Asus made the Zenfone 6, it completely redid Zen UI to make it way simpler, use a lot of Google apps, just make it very close to stock Android. And when they launched the ROG Phone 2, they brought that over as an option. Now in the ROG Phone 3, they've got 4 different profiles embedded in the phone. There's 3 different gamery profiles, but then there's the classic profile, which makes it look like a regular, very close to stock smartphone. So for people that don't want those really gamery UI elements, you can switch it to be a lot more simple. And that choice carries over to an experience that's matched by the specs. You've got up to 16 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. You've got up to 512 gigabytes of UFS 3.1 storage. I mean, this phone just flies. I definitely didn't have any UI or stuttering issues, and when running Speed Test G, this phone performed better than pretty much any other phone we've tested. It's super fast. Now, on the last couple ROG phones, the 6,000 mAh battery made this phone stay alive forever. I mean, that's a huge cell, so it lasts a couple of days. And in some circumstances, that was the case on this phone as well. The max amount of battery life I got was over 9 hours of screen on time, closer to 10 hours of screen on time. And that's just insane. That's pretty much 2 full days of battery life. But on some days, I got closer to 6.5 or 7 hours of screen on time, which again, isn't bad, but it's just kind of weird that it's fairly inconsistent. Now, I'm assuming that that's because I had the screen refresh rate on auto mode, and it would probably go up and down depending on the apps that I was using, but you should be aware of that. Now, Asus does ship this phone with a 30-watt charger, and it does charge the phone pretty quickly, especially considering that this is a 6,000 mAh battery, so that's really nice to see as well. And finally, we get to the camera system. And I know, a gaming phone probably doesn't have the camera system as its main priority, but man, I was really surprised at how good these cameras are. The main sensor is a 64 megapixel Sony IMX686. And overall, it had really good dynamic range, super good color, and really good sharpness. Now, it wasn't the best in low light, but overall, I mean, it's really good. Like, I preferred this camera system to the Samsung Galaxy S20, which is saying something. You've also got a 13 megapixel wide angle sensor, which has a pretty similar color profile to the main sensor, and it's got a lot of dynamic range too. I mean, you can literally point this at the sun and still get sky detail. It's pretty insane, but it would randomly get some weird splotchiness, which was kind of random. It wasn't that common, but it is important to note. And then on the back, you've got a 5 megapixel macro camera. And by and large, I kind of feel like macro cameras are just thrown in there to add specs to spec sheets. And it's kind of annoying, but the macro camera on the ROG Phone 3 was pretty solid, and it's definitely better than the 2 megapixel macro camera on the OnePlus 8, so I can't complain. Now on the front, you've got a 24 megapixel selfie camera, and images looked really quite good. They had good sharpness, good dynamic range, and really good color. I wasn't expecting a selfie camera on a gaming phone to be that good, but I was pleasantly surprised. It even took pretty good photos in relatively low light. Now, what are the negatives? Because there's gotta be negatives, right? Well, the ROG Phone 3 doesn't have IP68 water and dust resistance because of the vent on the back. It doesn't have a built-in headphone jack anymore, which kind of sucks when it was in the ROG Phone 2. And it doesn't have wireless charging, which is quite a bummer for me because I use wireless charging all around my house now. Okay, so how much does this thing cost? Well, there are three main models that are being announced today. There's a model with 12 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage that is being sold for 999 euros. There's a model with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage that's being sold for 1,099 euros. And then there's going to be a Strix model, which is actually a lower end model, which is kind of weird because usually Strix is their like super high-end gaming brand, but that's going to be sold for 799 euros, and it has a regular Snapdragon 865. It has less storage and less RAM. Now obviously, 1,000 euros is a lot of money no matter what phone you're buying, but for what this phone offers, I actually think that's worth it compared to the competition. If you look at a similarly spec'd Galaxy S20 Ultra, that's about 1,399 euros. And that you're not getting the Snapdragon 865 Plus, you're not getting the massive 6,000 milliamp hour battery, you're not getting the 144 Hertz refresh rate or the Air Triggers or X mode. Of course, if you go with that phone, you are getting IP68 water and dust resistance, you're getting wireless charging, and you're getting the 108 megapixel camera. It depends on how much you care about that. But look, I think the ROG Phone 3 is a super good phone. It's got an amazing UI, really good cameras, insane performance, and some really cool features that gamers are really going to appreciate. Obviously, if you need some of the other bells and whistles like wireless charging or a headphone jack, you're gonna have to look elsewhere. But for what Asus is asking for this phone, I think it's pretty solid. Anyways, guys, I think that's about it for the Asus ROG Phone 3. Now I have a very detailed post over at AndroidAuthority.com, and I've got a link in the description if you want to check that out. That's about 4,000 words, so if you want to go super in depth, I've got all that information over there. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video.